Some people don't fall because life was unfair to them. They fall because they spent years blaming everyone else for the cracks they refused to fix. Madison's voice shook so hard that the crystal glasses on the dining room table seemed to tremble with her. "You always wanted me to fail," she cried, pointing directly at me while 20 pairs of eyes turned in my direction at once. The room went completely silent. Even the soft jazz playing through the ceiling speakers suddenly felt too loud. I sat there frozen with my hands folded in my lap while my son Ryan stared down at his plate like a child pretending not to hear his parents fighting. I remember noticing ridiculous little details in that moment. The smell of rosemary chicken getting cold on the buffet. The flicker of candlelight against the dining room windows. The way Madison's mascara had started running down her cheeks, leaving dark streaks across her expensive foundation. If someone had walked into that house right then, they would have believed every word she said. They would have seen a heartbroken younger woman whose cruel mother-in-law had secretly rooted against her success. And maybe that was exactly what Madison wanted. It was supposed to be a simple family dinner. Ryan had insisted we all get together because, according to him, things have been stressful lately. That was the understatement of the year. 3 weeks earlier, Madison's skincare company, Velvet Bloom, had officially collapsed. Her website was gone. Her employees had disappeared overnight. Investors were demanding answers. And rumors had already started spreading across town that she owed more money than anyone realized. But none of us expected her to explode like that. "I knew it," Madison continued, her voice cracking louder now. "Every time something went wrong, you looked at me like you were waiting for this day." My daughter, Claire, shifted uncomfortably beside me. Ryan finally looked up, but he still said nothing. That hurt more than Madison's accusation ever could, because Ryan knew the truth. Or at least I thought he did. I had spent 5 years helping Madison build that business. 5 years babysitting my grandkids for free while she attended branding events in Chicago and networking retreats in Scottsdale. 5 years writing checks I probably should have kept for my retirement. But none of that mattered anymore. In Madison's version of the story, I was the bitter old woman who secretly hated seeing her succeed. And as I looked around that table, I realized something terrifying. Most of them believed her. Nobody spoke for several seconds after Madison's outburst. The silence spreading across that dining room felt heavier than the winter rain tapping against the windows outside. Then Madison grabbed her wineglass with shaking fingers and laughed bitterly through her tears. "Of course you are not saying anything now," she said while staring directly at me. "That is what you always do. You act innocent while quietly judging everybody." I could feel Claire watching me carefully beside her, almost waiting for me to defend myself. But I did not. At 67 years old, I had already learned something painful about family arguments. The louder one person becomes, the more suspicious calmness looks to everyone else. Ryan finally cleared his throat. "Madison," he said quietly, "maybe we should just sit down and breathe for a minute." But Madison turned toward him instantly. "Do not do that," she snapped. "Do not pretend this came out of nowhere." Her voice cracked again. "Your mother never believed I could build something successful." That sentence settled over the room like smoke. I looked down at the linen napkin folded beside my plate and suddenly remembered a very different night from 5 years earlier. Back then, Madison had sat at my kitchen counter with swollen eyes and trembling hands while Ryan paced nervously near the refrigerator. She had just lost her marketing job in Denver, and they were drowning in credit card debt. I still remember Madison staring at me and whispering, "I just need one person to believe in me." At the time I truly did. She had seemed ambitious and determined. She talked about creating clean skincare products for women over 40, saying the beauty industry ignored aging women completely. Honestly, I admired that idea. 2 weeks later I withdrew $40,000 from the retirement account my late husband Harold and I had spent decades building together. It was money we originally planned to use for traveling after retirement. Vermont in the fall, Maine during lobster season, maybe even Alaska one summer. Instead, I handed the check to Madison across my kitchen table. She cried when she opened the envelope. Ryan hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. Madison even called me her guardian angel back then. Funny how quickly people rewrite history once they are ashamed of the ending. "You never supported me emotionally," Madison said suddenly, pulling me back into the present. You always looked at me like I was making mistakes. I slowly lifted my eyes toward her. What nobody at that table knew yet was that I had spent the last 6 months trying desperately to keep her business from collapsing. And the worst part was not the debt. It was the lies Madison had started telling to protect the image she built online. Because somewhere along the way, my daughter-in-law stopped caring about whether her company was real. She only cared whether strangers believed it looked successful. The strange thing about success is that sometimes it changes people long before the money ever arrives. In the beginning, Madison used to call me almost every day. She would ask for recipes while driving to meetings, text me photos of new product labels, and thank me constantly for watching the children whenever she needed help. Back then she still sounded grateful. Still human. But after Velvet Bloom started getting attention online, something in her slowly shifted. At first, the changes were small enough to ignore. She stopped introducing me to people at her events. When I attended one of her holiday launch parties downtown, she smiled tightly and said, "Just tell people you are family," instead of calling me her mother-in-law. I remember standing there near a champagne tower while women in tailored white blazers complimented Madison on her self-made success story. Self-made. That phrase stayed in my head all night long. Ryan noticed it too. One evening, after Madison had fallen asleep on the couch with her laptop still open beside her, he quietly said to me, "I think success is stressing her out." But deep down I knew it was more than stress. Madison had become obsessed with appearances. Every corner of her life needed to look expensive, polished, and enviable. She traded her practical SUV for a white Range Rover they could barely afford. She rented a massive office space with marble floors, even though half the desks sat empty most days. Her social media videos became more dramatic every week. Candles flickering beside luxury skincare jars. Rooftop dinners with influencers. Photo shoots inside rented vacation homes pretending they were business retreats. Thousands of strangers online called her inspiring. Meanwhile, I watched Ryan quietly begin using the same credit card for groceries every month because money had become so tight. One afternoon, I stopped by their house to bring chicken noodle soup for my grandson after he caught the flu. Madison was standing in the kitchen yelling into her phone while 3 unopened boxes sat by the back door marked final notice. The second she saw me, her expression changed instantly. She forced a smile and covered the phone with her hand. "Everything is fine," she whispered sharply before stepping outside onto the patio. But nothing was fine anymore. Even the house felt different. Tense. Artificial. Like a showroom instead of a home. A few days later, I attended one of Madison's live online product launches because she had begged the family to support her engagement numbers. During the broadcast, she laughed brightly and told viewers, "I built this company from absolutely nothing." Ryan looked down at the floor when she said it. I did too, because by then we both understood something painful. Madison had started believing her own performance. And people who become addicted to appearances will do almost anything to protect them once they begin falling apart. The first person who openly questioned Madison's business was not a banker or an investor. It was a woman named Denise who had worked for her since the beginning. Denise was in her early 50s, practical, organized, and patient in ways Madison never fully appreciated. She handled customer service, shipping problems, and inventory reports while Madison focused on branding videos and influencer events. I met Denise twice at the office, and both times she looked exhausted. The second visit stayed with me for a long time. I had stopped by to bring coffee and pastries because Madison claimed she was too busy to eat lunch anymore. The moment I walked into the office, I noticed tension everywhere. 2 young employees were whispering nervously beside stacked boxes that had not shipped yet. One girl quickly closed her laptop when Madison walked past. Denise was standing near the back office holding a clipboard against her chest, like she was trying to protect herself with it. Madison barely looked up from her phone when I entered. "Can you believe people expect overnight shipping during a supply chain crisis?" she complained loudly while scrolling through comments online. Denise quietly said, "The problem is not shipping anymore, Madison. The warehouse has stopped releasing inventory because the balance is overdue." Madison's entire expression hardened instantly. "I told you I am handling it," she snapped. The room went silent after that. Later, while Madison stepped outside to take a call, Denise walked me toward the front door. Her voice dropped almost to a whisper. She keeps spending money like the company is twice this size, she said carefully. I do not think Ryan knows how bad things are. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach the entire drive home. That night I called Ryan after dinner and asked him directly if they were having financial trouble. There was a long pause before he answered. Madison says it is temporary, he said quietly. She says once the holiday campaign launches, everything will stabilize. But his voice sounded tired, defeated, like a man trying very hard to believe something that already felt untrue. A week later, Denise resigned. Madison announced it online as a strategic restructuring decision, complete with smiling photos and polished captions about growth and innovation. But Ryan accidentally told me the truth while helping me carry groceries into my garage. Denise had walked out after begging Madison to stop ignoring unpaid tax notices and overdue supplier invoices. Madison said Denise was creating negative energy, Ryan admitted softly. I remember standing there beside my freezer chest while cold autumn air drifted through the open garage door. For the first time, real fear settled into my chest. Because businesses do not collapse all at once. They collapse in layers. First comes denial, then pride, then silence. And by the time people finally admit the truth, the damage is usually already too deep to hide. By December, Madison had stopped talking about profits completely. Everything became about visibility instead. Brand visibility, social visibility, online visibility. She spoke about attention the way normal people talked about oxygen, like she could not survive without it. One Saturday morning, she invited the whole family to a holiday influencer brunch at a boutique hotel outside Chicago. The event looked beautiful on the surface. White roses covered every table. Waiters carried trays of sparkling drinks through the ballroom. A giant gold sign near the entrance read Velvet Bloom Winter Experience in glowing letters almost 6 feet tall. Women lined up to take photos in front of it for social media. Claire leaned toward me and whispered, "This must have cost a fortune." I did not answer because I was too busy noticing all the things that felt wrong. Half the guests seemed more interested in filming themselves than testing products. Madison kept disappearing into side rooms looking tense and irritated before returning with a camera-ready smile seconds later. Ryan looked exhausted the entire afternoon. At one point, I found him alone near the coffee station staring at his phone with his jaw clenched tightly. "Are you all right?" I asked softly. He forced a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Just work stuff," he answered too quickly. But as he slipped his phone into his jacket pocket, I accidentally saw the screen. Overdue payment notice. The words flashed in my mind for the rest of the day. Later that evening, Madison stood in front of a ring light, thanking everyone for supporting women-owned businesses. The crowd applauded while she smiled brightly in a fitted cream-colored dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment years ago. Then she raised her champagne glass and said something that made my stomach drop. "People love to doubt ambitious women," she announced dramatically. "But I built all of this because I refused to listen to negativity." As she spoke, her eyes drifted toward me for half a second. Barely noticeable, but intentional. Claire noticed it too because she shifted uncomfortably beside me. On the drive home, snow flurries drifted across the highway while Ryan remained unusually quiet behind the wheel. Finally, after nearly 20 minutes of silence, he admitted something I had already started suspecting. Madison had taken out another business loan without telling him until after the paperwork was signed. "She says this one will carry the company through the slow season," he said weakly. "How much?" I asked carefully. Ryan tightened both hands around the steering wheel before answering. $200,000. I felt cold all over despite the heater blasting warm air through the car. Because businesses in trouble usually cut back. Madison was doing the opposite. Spending more. Borrowing more. Pretending harder. And somewhere deep inside I realized something terrifying. She no longer cared whether the company survived. She only cared about surviving the embarrassment of failure. 3 days after the holiday event, I received a phone call that changed the way I saw everything. It came just after 7 in the morning, while I was watering the small herb garden behind my townhouse. The number was unfamiliar and I almost ignored it. "Mrs. Carter?" a woman asked nervously when I answered. "This is Melissa from Greenline Accounting. I apologize for contacting you directly, but I do not know who else to call." The moment she mentioned Velvet Bloom, my chest tightened. Melissa explained that her firm had been trying to reach Madison for weeks regarding unpaid invoices, missing tax documents, and serious discrepancies in company spending reports. At first, I assumed there had to be some misunderstanding. Madison was careless sometimes, dramatic certainly, but not irresponsible. Enough to ignore accountants completely. Then Melissa quietly said something I still remember word for word. Your daughter-in-law seems more concerned with maintaining appearances than fixing the actual numbers. I sat down slowly on the cold patio chair behind me while winter wind rustled through the bare trees overhead. Melissa sounded exhausted, almost guilty. She explained that multiple advisors had warned Madison to reduce spending months earlier. Instead, Madison doubled her marketing budget, hired luxury photographers, and continued hosting expensive promotional events while supplier debts piled higher every week. Her social media presence suggests explosive growth, Melissa said carefully. But internally, the company is bleeding cash. I closed my eyes for a moment because suddenly everything made sense. The forced smiles, the secret of phone calls, Ryan's constant exhaustion, the fake confidence Madison wore like makeup. Before hanging up, Melissa hesitated and then added quietly, "Honestly, Mrs. Carter, I think she is terrified." That sentence stayed with me long after the call ended, because fear can make people selfish in ways pride never could. That evening, I drove to Ryan and Madison's house carrying a casserole dish I knew nobody would eat. It was only an excuse to see them face to face. Madison opened the front door wearing flawless makeup and workout clothes that still had designer tags hanging from the sleeve. "We are actually heading out soon," she said quickly before I even stepped inside. But Ryan appeared behind her looking pale and worn down. "Mom's already here," he muttered quietly. "Let her come in." The tension between them felt sharp enough to cut through. While Madison disappeared upstairs to change clothes, I pulled Ryan aside near the kitchen island. "Tell me the truth," I whispered. "How bad is it?" Ryan rubbed both hands across his face before answering. "Worse than she admits." His voice cracked slightly. "I found out yesterday she skipped payroll taxes to keep the business account from going negative." I stared at him in disbelief. Does she understand how serious that is? Ryan laughed bitterly under his breath. She thinks one big investor will magically fix everything. Upstairs, I could hear Madison moving around quickly, opening drawers, slamming closet doors, talking loudly on the phone about branding meetings and future expansion plans. Listening to her from downstairs felt surreal, like hearing someone decorate a house that was already burning. The real collapse began quietly, almost politely, which somehow made it more disturbing. There was no dramatic announcement at first. No public scandal. Just small signs appearing one after another like cracks spreading through glass. Ryan stopped taking the kids out to restaurants on weekends because money was tight for a while. Madison suddenly became obsessed with checking her phone every few minutes, even during family dinners. One afternoon, Claire called me after seeing comments online from customers complaining they never received orders. "Mom," she whispered uneasily, "people are starting to get angry." But Madison acted as though none of it mattered. If anything, she became even more determined to look successful. 2 weeks later, she hosted another live stream from a rented luxury condo in downtown Chicago. She stood beside floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline while talking excitedly about massive growth opportunities and expansion plans for the new year. Meanwhile, Ryan was secretly borrowing money from his retirement account just to cover their mortgage payment. I only learned that because he accidentally left paperwork on the kitchen counter during a Sunday visit. When I quietly confronted him later, his eyes filled with exhaustion. "I do not know how to stop this anymore," he admitted. "Every time I try talking to her, she says I am destroying her confidence." I could hear the helplessness in his voice. The same helplessness I used to hear from my late husband whenever his younger brother fell into another gambling problem decades ago. Loving someone who refuses reality can make you feel like you are drowning beside them. A few days after that conversation, I drove to the Velvet Bloom office unannounced. The parking lot was almost empty even though it was the middle of the afternoon. Inside the beautiful marble lobby Madison once bragged about looked strangely abandoned. One of the decorative wall signs had already been removed, leaving pale outlines where the letters used to hang. A young receptionist sat behind the front desk staring nervously at her computer screen. "Is Madison here?" I asked gently. The girl hesitated before nodding toward the back office. I could hear Madison arguing before I even reached the hallway. "I told you the wire transfer is coming," she snapped sharply at someone through the speakerphone. "You cannot freeze operations over one delayed payment." The moment she saw me standing there, her face drained of color. "What are you doing here?" she demanded. For a second, I almost felt sorry for her. Her mascara was smudged beneath tired eyes, and empty coffee cups covered her desk beside stacks of unopened envelopes. She looked less like a confident business owner, and more like someone desperately trying to outrun a storm already overhead. "Madison," I said carefully, "you need to stop before this gets worse." Her expression changed instantly. Cold. Defensive. Humiliated. "You would love that, would you not?" she whispered bitterly. "You have always hated seeing me dream bigger than you ever did." And in that moment, I realized something heartbreaking. Madison no longer saw concern as love. She saw every warning as an attack. The collapse finally became impossible to hide in early February. That was when customers started posting videos online demanding refunds, and local business blogs picked up the story. Madison spent entire nights glued to her laptop trying to delete comments faster than they appeared. Every morning brought a new disaster. Missing shipments, frozen vendor accounts, threatening emails from investors. One evening Ryan showed up at my townhouse alone with dark circles under his eyes so deep, he barely looked like himself anymore. He sat at my kitchen table while I reheated leftover pot roast, but he never touched the food. "The bank froze one of the business accounts this morning," he said quietly. I slowly set my fork down. "Does Madison know?" He laughed bitterly under his breath. "She found out during a live stream." Apparently Madison had been promoting a new product bundle online when several viewers began flooding the comments section, asking whether the company was shutting down. At the exact same time, her payment processing system stopped working. Customers could no longer place orders. According to Ryan, she smiled through nearly 10 minutes of panic before abruptly ending the broadcast. "She locked herself in the bedroom afterward," he admitted. "Then she blamed me for stressing her out." I stared at him carefully across the table. "Ryan," I said softly, "you cannot save someone who refuses the truth." He looked away immediately because I think part of him already knew that. 2 days later, Madison called a family dinner at their house. She claimed she wanted everyone together because things had gotten emotionally difficult lately. But the second I walked through the front door, I felt something strange in the air. Madison had candles lit everywhere and soft music playing like she was staging a performance instead of hosting family. Her makeup was flawless again. Her smile too polished. Ryan barely spoke while we ate. Claire noticed it too because she kept glancing nervously between them throughout dinner. Then, halfway through the meal, Madison suddenly placed her wineglass down with a dramatic sigh. "I am tired of pretending everything is okay," she announced softly. The entire table went quiet. She turned toward me slowly, her eyes already shining with tears. "Do you know what hurts the most?" she whispered. "Realizing someone in your own family never wanted you to succeed." I felt my stomach drop because suddenly I understood exactly what she was doing. This dinner was not about honesty. It was about blame. Madison continued speaking before anyone could interrupt. She talked about criticism, negativity, emotional sabotage. She described herself like a woman constantly attacked for daring to dream bigger than everyone around her. And little by little, every sentence pointed toward me without saying my name directly. Claire looked confused. Ryan looked trapped. But Madison looked prepared. Like she had rehearsed this entire breakdown in advance. Then, finally she turned toward me fully, tears sliding perfectly down her cheeks, and said the words that silenced the entire room. "You were waiting for me to fail so you could finally feel superior to me." For a few seconds after Madison accused me, nobody moved. The only sound in the dining room came from the soft hum of the refrigerator in the next room, and the rain tapping against the windows outside. Madison sat there crying carefully into a linen napkin while Ryan looked physically sick beside her. Claire stared at me with confusion written all over her face, like she was trying to understand how our family had suddenly become strangers to each other. I could feel every eye at the table waiting for my reaction. Maybe Madison expected me to break down. Maybe she wanted me to defend myself emotionally, so she could call me controlling or manipulative. But the truth was, I had spent months preparing for this moment without fully realizing it. Quietly, I reached down beside my chair and lifted the leather folder I had brought with me earlier that evening. Madison's expression shifted instantly the second she saw it. Just for a moment, the confidence behind her tears disappeared. "What is that?" she asked sharply. I ignored the question and slowly opened the folder in front of me. Inside were printed emails, financial statements, unpaid invoices, and copies of messages Ryan had forwarded to me during the worst months of the crisis. I looked directly at Madison before speaking for the first time all evening. "I never wanted you to fail," I said calmly. "But I also refused to lie for you." The room remained silent. Even Madison stopped crying. I slid the first paper across the table toward Ryan. It was an email from Greenline Accounting dated nearly 7 months earlier warning Madison to reduce unnecessary spending immediately. Then another document. A supplier notice threatening legal action if outstanding balances were not paid within 30 days. Then another. Luxury hotel charges billed through the company account during the exact same month employees missed paychecks. Madison's face slowly drained of color with every page. "You went through my private records?" she whispered. Ryan looked up suddenly. "Private records?" he repeated. "Madison, these are company expenses." His voice sounded stunned. I could see pieces finally connecting inside his mind. The loans, the missing money, the constant emergencies. Claire quietly picked up one of the invoices and frowned. "You spent $12,000 on a branding retreat in Arizona?" she asked softly. Madison's breathing became uneven. "It was for networking," she snapped defensively. "You would not understand how businesses work." But nobody answered her this time, because the illusion was beginning to crack right in front of everyone. I carefully removed one final document from the folder and placed it directly in front of Ryan. His eyes widened almost immediately. "Madison," he whispered. It was a warning notice from the Internal Revenue Service regarding unpaid payroll taxes, dated 4 months earlier. Ryan stared at the paper like he no longer recognized the woman sitting beside him. Madison suddenly stood up so quickly her chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. "You planned this," she said shakily while staring at me with panic rising behind her anger. But I simply closed the folder slowly and looked back at her calmly. "No, Madison," I answered quietly. "You did." Madison looked around the dining room like someone trapped inside a nightmare she could no longer control. Her hands trembled visibly at her sides while Ryan continued staring at the tax notice in disbelief. I had seen my son heartbroken before. I had seen him stressed, exhausted, frustrated. But I had never seen him look betrayed until that moment. "You told me the taxes were handled," he said quietly without lifting his eyes from the paper. Madison swallowed hard. "I was going to fix it," she whispered. Ryan finally looked up at her then, and the pain in his face nearly broke my heart. "With what money?" he asked. Nobody moved. Nobody even reached for their drinks anymore. The entire dinner table felt frozen in place while years of lies slowly surfaced one piece at a time. Madison suddenly turned toward me again, desperate anger flashing through her embarrassment. "You think you are innocent in this," she snapped. "You never supported me emotionally. You judged every decision I made." I let out a slow breath before answering because at that point, I no longer felt angry, just tired. "Madison," I said softly, "support does not mean pretending reality is not happening." Claire lowered her eyes immediately after hearing that. I think everyone at the table understood the truth of it. Madison had spent so long surrounding herself with people who applauded every performance that honesty started feeling cruel to her. Ryan rubbed both hands across his face before suddenly standing up from the table. "How bad is it really?" he asked quietly. Madison hesitated too long. That silence answered everything before she even spoke. "The investors are threatening legal action," she admitted weakly. "And the bank froze the operating account." Ryan closed his eyes for several seconds. "Anything else?" he asked. Madison looked down at the floor. "The mortgage is 2 months behind." Claire inhaled sharply beside me. I felt my stomach tighten despite already expecting something terrible. Ryan looked completely stunned now. You told me the refinance paperwork was approved, he whispered. Madison's voice cracked again. I thought I could fix everything before you found out. Then Ryan asked the question that changed the entire room. How long have you been lying to me? Madison burst into tears again after that. But this time nobody rushed to comfort her. Because the problem was no longer just the business. It was the deception, the manipulation, the months of pretending while everyone else carried the consequences. Ryan slowly sat back down in his chair and stared across the table at me with an expression I had not seen since he was a little boy frightened after a bad dream. Mom, he said quietly, almost ashamed. Did you know all of this? I nodded once. Not everything, I admitted. But enough to know you were both sinking. Ryan looked down at the scattered papers again before whispering something that made the entire room ache with sadness. All this time, he said softly, I thought you were trying to tear us apart. I looked at my son for a long moment before answering the truth I had carried silently for months. Ryan, I said gently, I was trying to keep your family from collapsing. The family dinner ended quietly after that, which somehow felt sadder than shouting ever could have. Claire left first, hugging me tightly before whispering, I am sorry, Mom. Ryan stayed frozen at the table long after everyone else stopped talking. Madison sat across from him, wiping tears from her face over and over, but the room had changed now. Her words no longer controlled the atmosphere. The truth did. I gathered the papers slowly back into my folder while Madison watched me with an expression I could not fully read anymore. Anger was still there, but beneath it I finally saw something else. Fear. Not fear of losing the business. Fear of losing the image she had built around herself for so many years. Before leaving, I walked into the kitchen to put my untouched dessert plate beside the sink. Ryan followed me a moment later. Mom, he said quietly, why did you not tell me sooner? I turned toward him carefully. He looked exhausted in a way no amount of sleep could fix. Because every time I tried warning you, I answered softly, you defended her before listening. Ryan lowered his eyes immediately because he knew I was right. For months, every concern I raised became another argument between him and Madison. Eventually I stopped speaking because nothing hurts more than watching your own child mistake your love for interference. Ryan leaned against the kitchen counter heavily. I think we are going to lose the house, he admitted. Hearing those words out loud finally made everything feel real. Not branding. Not social media. Not appearances. Real life. Mortgage payments. Debt. Children. Consequences. I stepped closer and placed my hand gently against his arm. You still have time to rebuild your life, I said quietly. But only if you stop protecting lies. Ryan nodded slowly, though his face remained full of grief. On my drive home that night, snow covered the roads in thin silver layers beneath the streetlights. I should have felt victorious after finally exposing the truth, but I did not. I only felt empty. Because there is nothing satisfying about watching people you love destroy themselves trying to impress strangers. The next morning Madison sent me 3 long text messages in a row. The first accused me of humiliating her intentionally. The second blamed me for turning Ryan against her. The third simply said, I hope you are happy now. I read all 3 while sitting alone at my kitchen table drinking coffee, and for the first time in months I did not respond. Not because I hated her. Not because I wanted revenge. But because I finally understood something important. Madison had spent years using other people as emotional scaffolding every time her world started shaking. Ryan protected her. I financed her. Employees covered for her. Friends applauded her. And the moment anyone stopped carrying part of the weight, she called it betrayal. That afternoon, I quietly transferred the last small monthly payment I had been sending Ryan to help with childcare expenses into my own savings account instead. Then I called my realtor and told her I was officially putting the lake property up for sale. The same property I once planned to leave to Ryan someday. Because love without boundaries is not kindness. Sometimes it is simply permission for someone to keep destroying themselves. By the beginning of summer, the world Madison built around herself had almost completely disappeared. Velvet Bloom officially filed for bankruptcy in April. The office lease ended 2 months later, And the company's social media accounts quietly stopped posting after weeks of desperate motivational quotes about resilience and reinvention. Strangely, once the noise disappeared, everything felt calmer. Ryan moved into a smaller rental townhouse across town with the children, while he worked through the financial damage piece by piece. He looked older now, more serious. But for the first time in years he also looked honest. Some weekends he brought the kids to visit me, and we spent quiet afternoons planting flowers on my patio or making grilled cheese sandwiches while old jazz records played softly in the background. Life had become smaller for all of us. Simpler too. Madison called me only once after the dinner. Her voice sounded flat and exhausted, stripped of all the polished confidence she used to wear so naturally. "I lost everything," she whispered over the phone. I stood by my kitchen window watching rain slide down the glass while listening to the silence between her words. Part of me expected another accusation, another attempt to blame someone else. But this time there was only emptiness. "No," I answered gently after a long pause. "You lost the version of yourself you were pretending to be." Madison started crying quietly after that, and for the first time since I had known her, the tears sounded real. Not performative, not strategic, just human. "I do not even know who I am anymore," she admitted weakly. I closed my eyes for a moment because underneath all the anger and manipulation, I suddenly heard something painfully familiar. Fear. The same fear people carry when their entire identity depends on being admired. "Then maybe this is the first honest beginning you have had in years," I told her softly. She did not answer for several seconds. Finally she whispered, "Did you ever hate me?" The question surprised me more than anything else. I looked around my quiet kitchen at the life I had rebuilt for myself after Harold passed away years ago. The peaceful mornings, the calm evenings, the freedom of no longer carrying everyone else's emotional weight. "No," I said honestly, "but I think you hated yourself every time reality interrupted the image you wanted the world to see." Madison cried harder after that, but I did not try rescuing her from those feelings anymore. Some lessons only arrive after the performance ends. A few weeks later, I sold the lake property and used part of the money to finally take the trip Harold and I once planned together. Maine in early autumn. Cold ocean air. Lobster shacks along quiet coastal roads. One evening, while watching the sunset over the water from a small inn balcony, I thought about everything our family had survived that year. The lies, the shame, the collapse. And strangely enough, I did not feel bitterness anymore. Only clarity. Because some people spend their whole lives believing love means protecting them from consequences. But real love sometimes means stepping aside and letting the truth arrive. And often, the people who accuse you of wanting them to fail are simply angry that you stopped pretending they were never falling at all.